So now we're in a position to understand and assess intuitionism's rejection of indirect proof. Recall that to construct an indirect proof of some statement, say A, you first assume A, derive a contradiction, and then you're free to negate the original sentence. Now, in classical logic and in the course of our studies, we've been conflating two kinds of indirect proof, a stronger and a weaker sort. The weaker sort is the one we just considered, where we take an assertion and then derive from it a contradiction or an absurd claim and then negate the original assertion. But there's a stronger sort where we negate something that we want to prove, then derive an absurdity or a contradiction, negate the original negation, and then by double negation we can assert the original sentence we wanted to assert A. And it's this kind of indirect proof that the intuitionists reject. Here's why. You only really have a proof of something if you have some direct experience of it, because there's no mind-independent truth. The problem with asserting not A and then deriving a contradiction is that it doesn't give you a direct experience of the truth of A. It merely tells you that the negation of A leads to an absurdity. And so it's on these grounds that the intuitionists reject it. On intuitionistic logic, you can assume A and show that it leads to an absurdity, that is to say, you can use the weak form of reductio, because by experiencing the absurdity of the claim A, you experience somehow its falsehood. But merely seeing the absurdity of the negation of A does not give you some experience of the actual truth, the direct truth of A, and so the intuitionists just dispense with it altogether. I should note, by the way, that there is something quite odd about indirect proof, and almost everybody agrees on this on some level. For example, even non-constructivists tend to prefer direct proof for the simple reason that in the course of a direct proof, you often turn up interesting and useful midway theorems or lemmas that you can use later on in other proofs or for other things. But if you're constructing an indirect proof, then all the things that you prove along the way are predicated on a false assumption, and so they're not really useful for anything else. And for this reason, many people prefer to prove things directly whenever they can. Now you might wonder, well, can't intuitionism at least use the strong form of reductio to know where to look? That is to say, suppose that we construct a reductio proof of the negation of A, then we say, okay, we have good reason to assume that A is true, therefore we can go looking to construct a positive proof of it. That would be interesting if it were the case, but it's not. Broadly speaking, the intuitionists don't construct things in the same way that classical mathematics does, and so there are truths on classical mathematics which are just not truths in intuitionism. We can perhaps discuss this in a subsequent video on the different attitudes that intuitionism and classical logic and mathematics have towards infinities. But for now, it's at least worth noting that there are really two kinds of reductio proof, and the intuitionists reject the strong one on the grounds that it doesn't give you an experience of the truth of the assertion in question.